talking a heathen, you know. Are you an atheist or a heathen?
He's not
agnostic.
agnostic.
No,
not agnostic.
He's
Don't
even
put the
agnostic.
I believe.
The question is, believe or what?
What chapter is it?
My father used to call me a heathen, and I always took it as a compliment.
Where did you say we are?
On Life After Death.
Oh, that's good. Again.
So there were
many times have you been here?
email that I couldn't open the PDFs. They were there, but there was nothing to open.
Do you want to read my book?
No,
Do you have any more books?
Yes.
Did you order some?
Oh, you're talking about.
Oh, your books too, I want to get. Did you get your books?
Those are on the way. They'll be here in a couple days this week.
Oh, good, okay.
There's 3 more of these over there.
Okay, because do you want one free?
yeah.
I think they're, what are they, 10?
They're not over there.
So yours are coming on the way?
Yes, they'll be here soon.
Okay. And Tasha said, well, when you have them, and try and have them do it to me, because then we'll trade books.
Who said that?
My daughter.
Okay. Oh, yeah, yeah.
I know, I gave her mine.
She's back in India now.
Yeah.
Okay. I would love to. Yes. We will, sure.
Okay.
Sorry.
For what?
You can share that because she's having more trouble than I thought it would be.
Sorry.
Just
What
wondering
she
why
wants.
you like that.
Oh, there's more books. Yeah, you need more books?
Well, let's see it.
Oh,
I'm gonna take all
You don't, you can share the
Yeah, that
chapters
looks
are really
good, Jen.
short.
Yeah.
Sorry, you can do what you want. Here, you look at my book. You want to read my book? I've read it. The chapter's only like 3 pages.
Yeah, please.
Thanks, Franny.
But it's 3 juicy pages, not just 3
juicy
pages.
Start.
You want one of these copies, Kathy? What did I do with my phone? I did.
Oh, that's a good idea. Let's shut down the phone.
Sit down.
Pass on around.
You know, this is a different one. Oh, you have a good thought there. Let's see.
That's yours. That's yours.
So,
Rhonda was asking where you are. I told her you're in your etheric body.
I'm checking hair and makeup.
Here, I need one of those. It's their best selling thing. Just go in there for what's the name of it?
I have one. I didn't I give you one? Oh, okay. Here. Oh, this one.
Yes. This is the color.
do you have it on?
It starts out that way.
Cherry, say something.
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 I really want, and it feels
1, 2, 3, or anything.
And I was telling her, you know, I can't stand to be without it. I could be coughing or something. I pull it out, and it's smeared all over my face. But the only thing that color would turn on my lips.
See, that's good for
Who makes it?
I wonder what color it would turn on me.
IT.
I tease.
With my nose.
Oh, okay, it's on what I just took a picture
Let
of.
me see for me.
Have I snapped too?
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah.
Did you see how well trained I am? I just,
Yeah.
first one.
Deborah, will you snap in front of that microphone right there? Okay, cool.
You can't reach it, huh?
I'm just checking the levels here.
Yeah. I thought I had one.
This is perfect.
Must have given it away.
I brought a couple more because there'll be more people showing up. Yeah. Usually the guys come in.
Oh, more men. We need more men.
It's always like that.
It's always
Right?
like
Yeah.
You've noticed that in your meetings too,
I
right?
don't want to be bothered.
Women are just more spiritual.
That's
She's getting on her head.
But we hope the men will come along.
That's right, we're trying.
Is there anything else that we need to
Drag
do
them
before we
along
start?
screaming, huh?
Pardon?
Drag them along
We're
screaming.
good.
Not that I can think of.
All right, it's 2:30.
All right.
All right. Shall we do it? Let's do it. Okay, everyone, welcome. It's 2:30. Let's begin. We have several online viewers and several in person, more than several. Thank you all for coming. Welcome, Richard. Let's start off with a short meditation like we normally do. Let's just be still and tune ourselves up. Just a short calming of our energies. So it helps to always have a straight spine. It helps the energetic flow inside the body just kind of harmonize and equalize. So use the back of the chair and just sit up tall. Crown of the head is roughly over the base of the spine. Chin is neutral, shoulders are relaxed. And just begin by taking a few deep breaths. Just hear the sound. Following the sound with your mind. As the physical sound of the bell dissipates, the thoughts calm and settle. And we begin to attune ourselves to the lessons at hand, teachings at hand. Just a moment of silence. Let's chant Om 3 times together. Inhale. Okay, and slowly come back. All right, welcome back, everyone. Are there more people in the room after the meditation? That's how it always works. Close your eyes, meditate, more people show up. Okay.
One thing Paul often mentions in his yoga classes is excellent advice in every aspect of life. You know what it is, right?
Oh, I say a lot of stuff.
He often says, relax everything that doesn't need to be tense.
You said that.
I try to remind myself of that several times a day. Relax everything that doesn't need to be tense.
That's right.
It's amazing how just that one bit of mindfulness changes your point of view for a while at least.
It also directs the attention inward instead of always sending energy out. It redirects your attention to the inner body, and you can energize and vivify yourself and just be aware of what's going on inside. And it also brings an element of presence. You know, the wise teachers that we always quote, they say that suffering only happens in the past and in the future. And if your attention is directed into your muscles or something physical, your inner systems, you're in the now moment. And according to the teachers that we trust, suffering can't occur when you're in the now moment. So inner body awareness is one clue. You naturally just kind of soften. And being soft isn't a bad thing. You know, some people say, oh, my belly's so soft. No, it's not a bad thing. How about soft jaw, soft shoulders, soft brow? That's healthy. That's good. It allows for a flow. Where are we? We're besides being here. We are here, but where?
And we know what time it is.
Now. Time is now. A trick question, right? Chapter 5. Life after death. Okay, so I'm just going to give our online students a quick glimpse of all the lovely faces here in the room.
Hi.
There we are. There's that direction, and now let's go over here. Roger's not smiling on purpose. All right. Everyone's famous. Okay. Primetime CNN. This is being broadcast.
Right.
Last week we got through over half of the chapter. We did a lot of foundational work on preparation for the death of the physical body. We barely got into what actually happens when the phenomenon of death occurs and ensues and what comes after. We spent the majority of time talking about how we can best prepare, because for most people in the Western world, death is what we refer to as taboo, and it's kind of shunned away and not talked about. And we emphasize how important it is to talk about it. Talking about it and shining light on the subject helps take away some of the discomfort that is associated with death. Now, it's virtually impossible to take away all of the negativity and hardships that go along with it, unless you're a master of wisdom, and then they're always perfectly even-keeled, which we aspire to be at some point. But talking about it and preparing does make that journey more accessible and less frightening, less scary. So that's the majority of what we talked about last meeting. We can revisit some of those topics, but I think we should just dive right into what happens when the moment of death ensues. And let me know when you want to share that. Okay. So we talked a little bit about cycles in nature, and how the dying of the physical body is just another cycle, and how certain traditions and cultures, specifically the Indian and Hindu culture, talk about 3 stages of physical life and 1 stage of non-physical life, which repeats over and over and over again. The 3 stages typically unfold in 25-year segments, from birth to 25 years old, from 25 to 50, 50 to 75-ish, and they're not exact. They're not precisely 25 years, approximately. And then the 4th cycle being that period of life from the physical body's death to the next incarnation. And there's a Tibetan word for that, which Terry told us last time. It's called bardo. That's the analogous to the winter season of life. So we have spring, summer, fall.
Just one quick comment about the periods of 25 years. Those of you who have studied or study astrology have heard of the Saturn return. Saturn requires approximately 26 to 30 years, more or less 27, 28 years, to make a complete circle around the sun. And many people notice that very profound occurrences happen each time that makes one more cycle for your own life, from the moment you were born to where it reaches the same degree in the same sign 27, 28, 29 years later. So those two, and it usually occurs only twice during your lifetime. So you often notice something that happens on those 2 anniversaries.
We're glad to have our friend Esther joining us. She's in is it the Gold Coast? Is that what they refer to the east coast of Australia? The Gold Coast?
Yes.
In Australia. So it's 8:30 a.m. on Monday there for Esther. She commented on what a lovely bunch you are. So we're reaching wide and far.
And I should say, same to you, mate.
I'm sure she heard you. So. It's been asked where we get this information from, since I can't prove it. We can't prove it to you in our modern scientific methods of where we're getting this information on life after death. But it comes from generally three places. From the observations of clairvoyance, from religions all over the world, all spiritual traditions, and from the reports of people who have experienced near-death experiences. So that's where the information comes from. So we made it up to the point in time where the death process, the moment of death is approaching, and the person begins to kind of go through a releasing process. Now, an energetic release. And part of that release and unwinding, so to speak, is what most people have heard of. It's the life review. So we did talk about this last time, and we'll just bring it up again. The life review is a rapid succession of memory of all events. Now, I don't know if it's every moment of every day of life, that's a lot, I'm not sure, or if it's just the major events. But it is from the beginning of this incarnation until the end, and it's kind of just like a discharging of energy, and it's a swift review in the consciousness of that person. And I actually have a passage to read from a different book.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
With regard to what you said about the period of letting go, releasing, Eckhart Tolle tells a great story about a woman who was dying from cancer. And she had a diamond ring that disappeared at some point when she was very ill, and people were coming in to help her. And she thought that maybe a specific person may have taken that ring. And so Eckhart Tolle went through this whole discussion with her about at what point are you going to be ready to let go of that? He said, you realize that at some point you have to let go and just not be worried about it anymore. He said, and it's up to you. You get to decide when you let go, unless you hold on to it right to the very end, this idea that somebody stole it from you. So over a period of a few days or weeks, she did let go of it. She decided that everything was fine, that she didn't need that. And guess what? It turned up. It wasn't stolen after all. It had been misplaced. And so that goes along with something else that Paul and I say. That which you hold on to desperately, you will lose. That which you let go of, you will have in abundance.
This is actually the key teaching, I believe, in this chapter. Now, the theory, all the information of what happens during the life review, what happens to the consciousness after the body dies, passing through the different koshas, that's all very interesting. It's very cool to learn, and we're going to dive into the details. But that's the practical teaching. That's the key. Preparing to die by letting go affects our after-death state. This is where most religions and theosophy diverge greatly. We choose, we create our conditions after death, and that's the practical teaching. How we live our life now determines the state. The idea of hell is not a location. It's an energetic condition that we create by either it's preparing one way, or we're preparing for hell, or we're preparing for heaven. And we do that by letting go or not letting go. And it's very interesting to see these stories that we're going to jump into, and these ideas of what happens when someone dies who has a very tight grasp on life and on material things, and what the condition after death is for that type of person. So that's the practical teaching. Okay.
Can I just ask one thing? You say to let go, and it's a grand idea, but sometimes some things are so major that they're very difficult to let. They just keep coming involuntarily. They keep coming into my mind. This one incident that happened in my life. And, hard as I try, it just keeps coming.
It takes a lot of practice, mindfulness, meditation, and it can be an actual practice during your meditation. Bring that up, review it, find out, try to figure out what is your attachment to that. Why does it keep coming back? And it's like you're doing your own counseling work. You're receiving advice from a counselor, and you are the counselor. And you figure out why that keeps coming back, and what do I need to do to let go. The cool part about meditation is that that's when we get answers to questions like that. I can't tell you what the answer is in your case, but I can tell you that the general process is to review it over and over again during meditation, and figure out what you have to do to let go of it so that it doesn't keep coming back.
Yeah, and there's also another way of perceiving it differently. So you step an inch this way, you look at it back feel it differently, and it changes.
And also another way would be to ask yourself, what is the consequence of letting go? What, because usually within that is why you don't want to let it go. So, it's the fear of whatever happens if you do.
But these things really, that is what attachment means. We are not able to let it go. We're not able to just ignore it. Stephanie talks about how her mother was upset about something, and she said, what?
She said, the more I thought about it, the madder I got.
And that's the key. It's easy to say stop thinking about it, but as Amal points out, it isn't always that easy. The concept is easy, the process may be difficult.
There could be a lesson in it as well. Some people ask me, how do we resolve our karma? Because that seems to be a huge question, and of course it is. If challenging situations keep coming up over and over again, how do we move past that if they keep coming up over and over again? Okay, one sec, Jerry. And in our book, if we were able to sum this up in one very simple but not easy teaching, simple but not easy, it is to accept it first. Accept it 100%. If we have 1% of fight and resistance to it, karma knows that, and we haven't learned the 100% of the lesson yet. There's still 1% of us, or 80% of us, that hasn't truly accepted. We might say, "Oh, I'm over that. I'm over. I'm so over it." You know, people who say that, "I'm so over that."
Meaning you're not at all.
Meaning you're not at all over it. Really. Okay.
My personal experience with that is in relation to people in my life in this lifetime. And one of them would be an older brother who he and I never really got along, and he just wished me away. That's the way I felt. And so being on this path, I always thought, I don't want to be angry. I don't want to create any new karma, because karma doesn't know really right or wrong. It just knows balance, and it's in my mind's eye, and it's the law of cause and effect. So keeping that in mind, what I did was just meditated and made a promise to always love him. And at that point in my life, it was easier. And because I know we had a past life and several together. And I'm sure I was not a nice person. And I don't want to create another lifetime with this person again. So I chose to take the high road and just and come from my higher self, which is me, or that is me, and just to love him. And it's been much easier.
And this is a very important point, and that is, if you don't want to be going through the same processes every single lifetime, you are in charge of that. You get to decide, and what you have to do is process it once and for all in this lifetime if you want to avoid it coming up again and again. One thing that I do in meditation, I can't think of anyone ever that I've ever considered to be an enemy of mine. I just don't think of people as friends or enemies or whatever. They're just people, and I love all of them. But if you ever have any kind of a conflict or disagreement with something, one thing that I find is helpful during meditation is to bring that person close to you, but not as they are today, the little child within, the little 5-year-olds who is frightened and who is timid and shy or concerned about something. See them as the inner child that causes this bad way of acting. And, children act up, they throw tantrums, but it's because of fear, usually. So I just see them as a very little child who is acting out, but needs something comforting to help them move past that. I can't make somebody else change, but I can send them good thoughts and good vibrations, and I can change the way I perceive them.
We've all seen this chart many times. All right. The constitution of man. So for our online students. So the physical body here, and then the next body more removed is the pranic body, or also known as the etheric body. The reason why I'm bringing this up now is because when death occurs of the physical body, Theosophy teaches us that our consciousness makes a journey through the different koshas or bodies, and then it returns back to Earth again for another incarnation. So during the period of Bardo, our consciousness leaves the physical body dies and begins to decay, and we successively move consciously or semi-consciously, we'll see the qualities of consciousness here in a moment, through the various bodies in stages. So let's address what happens first. So the etheric body, or the pranic body, also known as the pranamaya kosha, is the part of us that gives the physical flesh life. So all the practices in yoga that talk about pranayama and energetic movement has to do with the pranamaya kosha, or the etheric body. In Theosophy, it's known as the etheric double because it looks like us. It kind of mimics the outline of our physical body, and yet it's energetic. It's not physical, and clairvoyants would see this as an aura of sorts. So at the moment of death, this pranic or etheric body withdraws, and the last bit of matter that is connecting it to the physical body, sometimes referred to as the silver cord or an etheric thread, is cut. And this book here, it's actually compiled by an author called A.E. Powell. He didn't write it, but he compiled this book from other authors' works. Some works from H.P.B. herself, and others from Leadbeater and Annie Besant and a few others. So this is all about the etheric body, and there's a section in the book about what happens when the physical body dies. And I'd like to give a different perspective on this life review and what happens. So let me just read this. It's quite interesting. All right. He says, "It is during the withdrawal of the etheric double, as well as afterwards, that the whole of the man's life passes swiftly in review before the consciousness of the man. Every forgotten nook and corner of the memory yielding up its secrets, picture after picture, event after event. In these few seconds, the consciousness, our consciousness, lives over again his whole life, seeing his successes and failures, loves and hatreds. Now, this is where it gets very practical and very interesting. He perceives the predominant tendency of the whole life during this life review. So he perceives the predominant tendency, also known as a samskara in Sanskrit language, tendency or samskara. He perceives the predominant samskara, and the ruling thought or thoughts of the life asserts themselves, marking the region in which the chief part of the post-mortem life will be spent. So in other words, the predominant habitual thought patterns determine the chief part of the post-mortem life for that person. As in the Kaushitaku Upanishad, that's one of the Vedas, one of the ancient Indian scriptures, describes it, at death, prana gathers everything together, and withdrawing from the body, prana then hands everything onwards to the knower, or the higher self, who is the receptacle of all. So to me, that's very profound, because in this life review, the predominant thought habits and patterns that we normally think begin to determine and set up the state for after death. So we choose this. This is of our own doing.
Remember that reality, or what most people call life, is not a series of events. There are things that happen, but your life is really your perception and your reactions to the events that occur around you. That is your life. And that's why that is so important, two people can experience exactly the same things, and yet it affects them completely differently. And the more advanced you become in mindfulness and awareness, the more you are in control of how you perceive it, how you choose to perceive it. And that's how you get rid of karma, so that you're not constantly creating more karma. The vast majority of people end their life with more karma than they came in with.
Yeah, and then they realize it at that split second, because in helping people cross over, I've seen all kinds of reactions to the last moments in the physical body if it hadn't already shut down and this, the spirit the soul had left the body. But when people are still alive and you can hear it, I don't know how you say it. I call it the death rattle, the body shutting down. And at that point, everyone I've helped cross over, I don't think I've had the same experience twice.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an amazing thing.
So the consciousness does move into this etheric double for a period of time, but it's like a drifting off to sleep. So in all of our sources, we're told that what we're aware of as the dying person, it's a drifting off to a sleep. There's a dreamy state of consciousness that exists when the etheric double is beginning to withdraw and the cord of matter is snipped. And to clairvoyance, the etheric body is said to hover or float for a period of time during this process of life review and during the period where the cord is snipped. And it's funny how in this particular book they use the word wraith to describe it. I know it has a negative connotation, but the etheric body that is withdrawing from the physical dense body is known as a wraith. And it probably wasn't originally a negative term, but when someone's not used to seeing or being aware of the energetic shell or sheath of a person, it would be uncomfortable. It's like an apparition or a ghost even. So that might be why the term wraith has gotten accumulated that negative connotation. So after the moment of death, the consciousness does remain in the etheric body for a period of time. It's said that it's normally several hours, but it could be days or weeks, depending on the level of attachment that person had to life.
I don't remember if we mentioned it last class, but the brain is the last organ to shut down. After all the other organs have stopped functioning, the brain, and they're not able to measure it, even with all of the instruments they got, but it continues to function for a short period of time before it also shuts down.
I wonder why.
I don't know.
Like what the benefit or the...
Well, I assume because that's the seat of consciousness. And so everything is withdrawing towards that. And it's also where the Brahmaranda is, the crown chakra. And that apparently is where the connection terminates and the life ends.
And we think it's opposite, right? We think when someone dies, the brain dies first and then all the organs and everything.
I don't know. I've never
Doctors
heard
think
that.
that.
I actually have never heard any discussion about it except in Theosophy. And that's what is taught there.
Well, look at all the people in comas.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's still brain activity,
True.
but the body's shutting down. So then the family or whoever is in charge has to make a decision. So,
And keep in mind too that the brain is the instrument. It is the vehicle through which the mind operates. So the mind may be completely active and very lucid, even though the physical brain may be damaged and not able to transmit that very well. One thing that in one of the KH letters that he talks about is that every single person, including the most insane person you can imagine, has a brief moment of lucidity just at the moment, just before the moment of death, where they can see in their life review everything just as clearly as the most awake, astute person can. And that's like the final part of that individual's life.
May I just say something about comatose people? It's been my experience, which is very limited. Some comatose people, there's no brain activity, there's nothing. I believe when I'm by them, I don't feel, they're not in there, they're gone. And families keep that going for no reason, except expense and profit for hospitals. But it's been my experience 2 times, I know they were gone. They were out of their body. And yet the families kept them on life support for months, years.
Yeah, I've actually read articles about that and seen videos. Talk about not letting go. One that I can think of was a very young girl, and she was in the hospital, had declared brain dead, and the family absolutely would not take her off life support. And she did eventually, after many, many months, regain a tiny bit of consciousness, but she was almost a total vegetable. They have to now care for her 24 hours a day. She's on a breathing apparatus. What kind of life is that? I kind of, their whole point was, well, see, she actually was alive. Well, I would argue whether or not that's alive. Sometimes the best thing you can do is really to let them go.
So see if I understand what you're saying. So I die. And or right before I die, rather, all the movie goes across my mind. Right?
Your vision, your
whatever.
awareness. Yeah.
My awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And I see my whole life. And I understand the patterns. And I understand the thoughts. And that's what I bring with me to the next dimension or whatever. So is there an awareness of, now I know why.
It's not a complete, everything, but I would say that it's a very profound meditative experience where you have much more clarity than you probably had at any other point in your life, especially if you've never meditated. That would be like a great meditative experience where you see it and it's clear, but that doesn't necessarily mean the next time you're incarnated that it's going to be clearer from the beginning. But you do have a moment of clarity, yes.
In that sense.
And the higher self is what absorbs the essence of that and then utilizes it in the next lifetime and all the subsequent lifetimes.
So it actually sets the stage for 2 things. First of all, the Bardo period after death, and secondly, the next lifetime. So that clarity and the thoughts that are uppermost in your mind when you die are what set the stages for that period and for your next life.
So a few more. Oh, sure.
Well, so this is kind of all somewhat new to me, but when I was born, I had previous karmas, not just the one that I'm creating or living and creating.
Certainly. Oh, yeah.
So if in that previous life, let's just say I had 8 karmas that all of them were negative. They were bad lives. I come into this world and I'm living my life, and let's just say that I also end up having a very negative outlook, and then all of a sudden I come here Well, and then I say,
Our life
okay,
changes.
I really want to change my karma that I'm aware of right now. By starting that process now, you can actually change all that negativity so that when you're actually going through that time of death and you're seeing everything, you've changed it from a negative to I've let it go. Is that
I think we're talking about two different things. Do you want to answer, or should I make a comment?
You answer and then I'll.
Okay. So we're not going to resolve all the past karmas in one life unless we're fairly advanced and we're nearing the end of our time in physical body. You can certainly work through the karma that's been presented to you in this lifetime. That's possible to work through 100%, but that doesn't mean all of the past karmas will be worked through. That's the first thing. So.
Okay, so a couple of points that this brings up is that when you are born, you're expected to live a specific length of time, whether it's 10 minutes or whether it's 97 years. It's a period of time. That doesn't mean you're going to die exactly at that moment, but it does mean that that's the allotted time. For everything, there is a season, a time to be born and a time to die.
It's a song, isn't there?
Oh, I'm gonna start.
the birds?
Yeah.
So you can change that also by the way you live. You can extend it or you can shorten it, depending on how you take care of your body and the habits that you develop during this lifetime. The second part of that is you are allotted a certain amount of your karma to work on, to try to work out during this lifetime. So we all have a huge amount of karma that would fill more than this room. So you can't, as Paul say, eliminate all that karma in one lifetime, but you can chip away at it. Like I said, most people eliminate some karma, but they've added so much more during that lifetime that they leave with an even bigger sack
It's
than
a
they came in
net
with.
positive effect versus a net negative, which is what the goal is.
So some people do better than others as far as working out their karma that was allotted to them during this lifetime. Once you become really aware of what's going on and make the necessary effort, you can really start chipping away at that karma, and it's going to be hell. It is difficult because you can actually take on more karma than what what was given to you if you want it. So those people who are anxious to get rid of it and be in a position to be more helpful to humanity do take on that karma. You cannot take on someone else's karma.
Not your
You would
job.
be depriving them of their life lessons, and it wouldn't be helpful. It would be like you feeling sorry for your daughter doing her math homework because it's hard. Well, let me do that for you. Here, hand it in. What good does that do? You can't learn someone else's life lessons for them. You can give them encouragement, you can give them tips, but you have to let them learn at their own pace. So those are just a couple of things that come up with that point that you brought up.
That brings up a funny thing. Stephanie, you might be able to relate to this. Whenever I go to take Bikram yoga, hot yoga, one of my favorite teachers over there, when we're in these challenging poses, squatting down and holding our arms out and sweat's dripping off of our elbows and we're breathing, and Frank, he'll say, no one's going to do this for you. You got to do the work on your own. No one can come in this room and do it for you, right? No one can exercise your body for you. It's the same concept. We have to do the work. It's that concept of shining the flashlight too and seeing what's inside and actually doing it for ourselves. Someone can guide us and point us to the location. There's a saying, we can show you where to dig and what to dig for, but the digging you must do yourself. Yeah.
And one of the things that I've discovered in understanding more about karma the older I got was that stay in tune. You know, stay in tune with what's going on. I mean, I always ask, why is this person? Why is this person in my life? I never ask why I'm in that person's life. That's not my job. That's up to them to decipher why I'm there. But to me, every new person represents or could represent karma. I know many relationships in this lifetime were about, it's karma. It's karma just wants a balance, I think. But I think the most precious thing that I've learned is to be in tune. That
is true. I'd like to move us along a little bit, or else we're going to run into the same thing that happened last time. We're not going to get through the chapter. Let's make a few more quick points about what happens at the etheric body withdrawing. So, just as the physical body dies and begins to decay and decompose, that's what happens to the etheric body too. And the successive bodies, as we move up, they finish their work, and then they are discarded and they die, and then they decompose and or disintegrate. So the physical body does first, the etheric body does next, if the person's consciousness isn't tightly entangled with the physical world. The goal here is to move through these bodies and do the release processes of energy that's built up. So the physical body is dying, the etheric body will release its energy and dies, and then we have the astral emotional body and then the mental body. So we need to move through these stages relatively quickly, or else we become stuck. And the whole concept of purgatory comes from this idea of being stuck in one of these realms for an extended period. So the astral realm is where it really happens, but we haven't even gotten there yet. We're still on the etheric. Now, this book opened my eyes to this idea of being tied to life so much that the wraith or the apparition, this is where I think the whole idea of ghosts comes from. It's a person who hasn't let go yet, is trying to move through these levels of consciousness and energy to dissipate and release and let those disintegrate so they can go home to their soul and rest, which we'll see is going to happen until the next incarnation. So eventually the etheric body will disintegrate and die, and the consciousness moves to the astral realm or the emotional body. Now there's one more thing that I want to read here, and I think it's appropriate and important to hear about this idea of grasping. And we talk about cremation of the physical body, which assists in that releasing process. So check this out for a second. Just wrap your mind around this. If a man is so misguided as to wish to cling to physical life and even to his own corpse, the preservation of the dead body, either by burial or embalming, offers a distinct temptation for him to do so, to cling, and immensely facilitates his unfortunate purpose. Cremation entirely prevents any attempt at partial and unnatural temporary reunion of the principles. Pretty strange to think about, right? But if you live your life clinging to the physical world and material things in your body, if you're someone who's very narcissistic and who identifies 100% with the body, which most of us do, that's why we know it first until we find spiritual teaching, right? Then this can be a problem. We might not be able to move on after we die. In addition, there are certain unpleasant forms of black magic, fortunately rare in Western countries at least, which make use of dead and decaying physical bodies. All these possibilities are avoided by the wholesome practice of cremation. Okay, so just a couple ideas on being able to release and let go and move along. So the consciousness goes from physical to etheric. Then when the consciousness moves from the etheric double to the astral emotional body, the etheric body begins to decay and eventually disintegrates as well. No more energetic, physical at all, nothing there. So now let's talk about the emotional body, or also.
Well, one quick point before we move on to that.
Okay.
And that is, it's generally during the 3 days after the death of the physical body that a person close to the person who died is most apt to have some kind of contact. After that, it closes off and is much more rare. But during that kind of 3-day window, you may have some kind of dream or vision, or during meditation, some kind of contact with the individual. It isn't something you should try to initiate on your own. If it happens, it happens. But in my own personal experience, for example, one time a very close friend died, and that very night I had the most vivid dream, and he was just ecstatic at all that he was able to do now. He had been extremely ill and hadn't been able to do all the things he loved to do, and he was just ecstatic and showing me all the things he could do physically again. But it wasn't physical, of course. And I was talking to his mother the next day, and she said, I had that exact same dream. Exactly. And so that indicated to me that there was some kind of an actual connection. So after the 3 days, generally, there is no more communication, though.
What about experiences outside the 3 days? Because we all know that those occur.
Well, okay, let's get to it.
That happens when the consciousness moves to the emotional body. And
Sometimes,
are
yeah,
you
go
going to do
ahead.
that?
Yeah,
I just get stiff if I sit so long.
Yeah.
You don't mind.
oh, yeah, certainly.
So let's give you a new
Is-
vocab.
Does she need to lower that chair?
No, that's fine. I'm fine.
Well, it has a
I have
lowering
that plastic
mechanism.
hip. I'm just getting
Okay.
over, so I can't sit very long.
All right. So the question is about whether what happens if communication occurs after the 3-day period.
When it occurs.
When it occurs.
Not
Okay.
if, because I mean, there's so many wins that we've all. It's not experienced, seen, heard about,
Okay.
discussed.
The entire premise of the spiritual movement, which started supposedly in America in 1847, I believe it was, but has actually been around with us
Well,
forever,
I mean, that has nothing to do with it.
is a topic of
Thank you.
some degree of interest, and it was especially interesting in the past when far more people were involved. When it first surged in America in the 1840s, interest was enormous. Very famous people became interested in spiritual seances and communing with the dead, etc., etc. Today, it's totally different. If you go on the internet and check out what's happening in this world of spiritualism, it, pardon the pun, is dead. There is just nothing going on. And why is that? Remember a few years ago, John Edward and some of the other famous mediums, that all the TV shows, those are all gone, completely gone.
They are gone.
And
So, think of it.
the reason for that is the internet.
The internet.
The internet. That has focused the light so brightly on some of these subjects that they've just disappeared. So you won't find any famous mediums today. If you do, let me know, because I'd be interested.
I have a whole book at home of them. It's this thick.
How old is it?
It's new. It was published last year. And do you know who what's his name? Eben Alexander is?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Evan
Okay.
Alexander.
So I went to a retreat with Eben Alexander in Kirnwall, and he spoke. His name's Dr. Schwartz, and he's got an entire, it's just so boring. It's this thick, and it is triple verified, triple blind studies on every single case. And like I said, I'm going to bring it to you because I don't want to say hundreds, there are so many references to this, and that are triple blind studied.
Let's see what Theosophy says about spiritualism. And it's very important to bring up that when H.P. Beam first came to America in 1873, one of her goals was to support and to give credence to the spiritualists and to their work. But her motive was to teach them what in fact is going on and to help them move beyond their attempt to communicate with the dead and to understand more about what life in general is all about and how it operates, why it operates the way it does. She failed miserably at being able to even make a dent in their way of thinking. They did not want anything to do with Theosophy. They were set on their communications with the dead, and that was all they were interested in. So this is an article that was on the Theosophist or the Theosophical Forum on Reddit, if any of you know what Reddit is. No,
Reddit?
apparently not. It's an online group that has thousands of different topics. If you're interested in spiritualism, you go to the page that is for spiritualism. Well, I checked it out this morning, and the last time somebody posted on there was 2 weeks ago. And there's almost nothing at all going on. So,
Why do you think that is, though? I mean,
well,
was it looked upon as a fad because these people, there are fads that come into focus and then go away, but that fad is just that. But there are people like us, several of us,
right,
that still believe, it was never a fad with me. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, because of digital awareness on subjects like this.
Here's what is becoming very prominent in our day, and that is approaching everything from a scientific point of view. Religions, interest in religion is declining. Interest in theosophy, declining. Interested in anything New Age, declining. And it's all because of people saying, okay, I'm tired of being fooled about stuff and believing in nonsense, so I'm not going to believe it unless the scientists believe it. That's the safe way.
But what
to
about
do it.
interest in quantum physics?
Yeah.
Well, here are two of the...
Because they enter...
How many of you have heard of Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins? And some of the other very famous scientists who, are brain scientists and who are physicists, etc., etc.
Roger Penrose.
They have nothing good to say about any of these subjects because they can't prove it.
Right.
Okay, do you know who Dr. Mark Pitzwick is?
No.
Well, he's working with Dr. Schwartz. He's the one I told you that wrote the big thick book that's got, and they're all PhDs and whatnot. And they are working on something called Soul Phone. Have you heard about it? Soul Phone? Well, they say that right now they have a device which does talk to the other side and answers yes and no questions, but they propose in another 2 years you'll be able to have actual conversation. So you can look up Mark, the great guy, but look at I'm trying to think the name of his letter. It's called Soul Proof.
Oh, yeah.
He puts out a letter called Soul Proof.
How many of you have ever tried working with a Ouija board? Oh my gosh.
And
Much
then
nicer.
very young.
it's not allowed in my house.
No, no, yeah, we were
No.
always, I mean.
Okay.
You
it was-
opened portals with that, and I did,
All right.
and it was not a good thing.
How many of you have ever watched, what is his first name? Brown is his last name. He's a man in Britain who had a TV show, and he would do experiments like this. For example, he got several young people in their 20s together in a dark room, and they did this thing with Ouija board, and they got all kinds of information.
Yeah.
But when when they investigated further, they realized that if you blindfold people, it won't work. It won't work. You are subconsciously, and it's been proved many, many times, pushing it. And it spells out these words. I did the same thing when I was 14 years old. I was scared to death because it said I was going to die a year later. And on that day, I went through the whole day petrified. But that's what happens. It's subconsciously moved around by the people.
Well, think about that, okay? Let's say, for instance, that's true, right? So now we get into the subconscious. And that's a whole other realm.
Okay, we need to.
It's
move
already
along.
3:30. We're still not even 2/3 of the way through our
All
chapter.
right, so
Did you want to read that article?
let me read just a couple of things from this. This is an article about the relationship between theosophy and spiritualism. This guy says, H.P. Blavatsky found in the growing adversaries of spiritualist proponents to theosophy sufficient need to declare it would have, meaning theosophy, would have nothing to do with it. She goes on with the Inquirer, noting a pattern of the fates of mediums concerning their mental state and bodies. And then it refers also to a letter that one of the adepts wrote to a woman named Laura Holloway, an American newspaper journalist. So, in The Key to Theosophy, for example, which is a book that HPB wrote near the end of her life, she has an inquirer who asks questions about theosophy, and then she, as a theosophist, answers the questions. So the inquirer says, "You seem to be bitter against spirits, as you have given me your views and your reasons for disbelieving in the materialization of and direct communication in seances with disembodied spirits, or the spirits of the dead. Would you mind enlightening me as to one more fact? Why are some theosophists never tired of saying how dangerous is intercourse with spirits and mediumship? Have they any particular reason for this?" So her answer is, it is because I believe in them with too good reason. And, save some cases of deliberate fraud, know them to be as true as that you and I live, that all my being revolts against them. Once more, I speak only of physical, not mental or even psychic phenomena. Like attracts like. There are several high-minded, pure, good men and women known to me personally who have passed years of their lives under the direct guidance and even protection of high spirits, whether disembodied or planetary. But these intelligences are not of the type of John King's or the Ernsts who figure in seance rooms. Those were famous spirits that would appear in the 1800s. These intelligences guide and control mortals only in rare and exceptional cases. She's talking about the adepts here, to which they are attracted and magnetically drawn by the karmic past of the individual. It is not enough to sit for development in order to attract them. That only opens the door to a swarm of spooks, good, bad, and indifferent, to which the medium becomes a slave for life. It is against such promiscuous mediumship and intercourse with goblins that I raise my voice, not against spiritual mysticism, for the former is just the same nature as the phenomena of 2 centuries ago. Then she says, what I mean is that whether conscious or unconscious, all this dealing with the dead is necromancy and a most dangerous practice. For ages before Moses, such raising of the dead was regarded by all the intelligent nations as sinful and cruel. The collective wisdom of all past centuries has ever been loud in denouncing such practices. Then she goes on to mention how many people she knew that had been damaged by mediumship, had their energy is affected, their sanity sometimes is compromised. In very few cases does it not cost a lot to be a medium. So let's see. She says, we being in possession of an older philosophy have tried to help and warn them, but they have repaid us by reviling and traducing us and our motives in every possible way. So she's saying that mediumship absolutely works. But she says no good comes from it.
And I can see that, but while you were talking, this light, so one of 3 things in my mind, okay? You need a new light, a new starter, or you need to smudge. So that's been kind of interesting.
What I studied with the spiritualists, I was amazed at how credulous they were. Every time, if a door is shut, they would say, "Oh, there's a spook in the room." And I'm saying, "No, there was a breeze that came through." And there's my way of looking at life is the simplest explanation is probably the correct one. I don't go looking for wild and bizarre explanations for simple things that happen. So I spent 7 years investigating spiritualism, and I didn't find anything particularly useful. So if things happen to you, look at it carefully and observe it. It absolutely does occur. I've had many experiences of my own. One thing I will tell you that a number of years ago, during that same period, I started becoming more sensitive and started becoming slightly clairvoyant. But I realized I had 2 choices. I could either continue doing that and develop more clairvoyance, knowing full well that it was not going to be very accurate because it's all colored by my own filters and by my own perceptions. Or I could leave that aside and work on moral development and ethics and get beyond that point where my own predilections color everything and where I'm able to see very, very clearly. Then you can come back down and develop those and you'll be much safer. This is one thing that I want to point out at the very end of this. Let's see here, if I can find it quickly. And this is from one of the adepts, KH. It's not from HPB. And he's in his letter to this Laura Holloway, he gives her advice. He says, how can you know the real from the unreal, the true from the false? Only by self-development. How to get that? By first carefully guarding yourself against the causes of self-deception and chief among them the holding of intercourse with elementaries as before, whether to please friends or gratify your own curiosity. And then, by spending a certain fixed hour or hours each day, all alone in self-contemplation, writing, reading, the purification of your motives, the study and correction of your faults, the planning of your work in the external life. These hours should be sacredly reserved for this purpose, and no one, not even your most intimate friend or friends, should be with you. Little by little, your sight will clear, you will find the mists pass away, your interior faculties strengthen, your attraction toward us gain force, and certainty replaces doubt. But beware of seeking or learning or leaning too much upon direct authority. Our ways are not your ways. We rarely show any outward signs by which to be recognized or sensed. So I think that's enough discussion about that for the time being. We can revisit it later. But clairvoyance and mediumship absolutely do exist. Whether or not they are useful is up for debate.
I want to make the point also that we see a process happening here. Theosophy tells us about the process of releasing and processing energies built up during the lifetime. And if we spend too much time trying to contact people that have died, it's kind of clear that we're impeding their process. Why are we bringing them back to the physical world when they're on their own journey of dissipating energies that they built up themselves during their life, and they're moving somewhere higher, which we're trying to work our way through this process in these discussions. So it's made very clear to us in Theosophy that only prayers of encouragement, positive energy are helpful for the dead people, specifically without being accompanied by feelings of grief and sorrow and regret. So I don't personally see a point. Yes, it's great to. I see why we want to. We're attached to loved ones. We want to talk. I see the appeal of it. From what I've learned from Theosophy, I don't know that it's helpful to the person at all.
We've mentioned it before, but it would be analogous to disturbing someone who's trying to sleep and asking them questions or interfering with their process. They are going through a very important process to them, and we are completely unaware of it and what their needs are. And if we try to initiate contact, we're doing nothing but interfering with that process.
All right, let's talk about, so it's 3:40. So we have two more huge topics to cover in the last 20 minutes.
Don't get excited, it's okay.
Or we could.
We're in our right perfect place.
I think so too, thank you. You're right, you're absolutely right. Let's talk about kama loka. Okay. Kama is a Sanskrit word that means desire, or it's sometimes referred to as love, or neediness, emotions, desires, kama. Loka is place or location. And that is what's referred to as the type of experience when the consciousness moves from the etheric body, we're still talking about this, to the emotional world. So the emotional body, we spend a period of time in this location called kama loka. Not a physical place, it's an energetic state. And the reason why it's called that is because this is where all of our emotional energy that has been built up during the lifetime is worked out and slowly dissipated. So the more emotions that somebody had, the more, whether it's perceived positive emotions or negative emotions, the energy built up needs to be dissipated in order to move on. So whether it's a person who had a temper, who had a quick, short fuse, or someone who, what's that?
ADD or ADHD.
Well, is that really an emotion or just a lack of ability to focus, though? If someone is if someone's very excitable and gets very excited all the time, that's energy that's being built up. So after the etheric body dies and we are now in this world of emotions, the emotional energy that we've created throughout our entire existence on Earth needs to be dissipated. And that can be a very fast process of several days or weeks for some people who are very even-keeled in their emotions and calm-natured, or it can be a long time, several hundred years perhaps.
Last class, I mentioned my mother, who had gone through a long period of letting go and making sure that there were no ties that were left unresolved. She died 12 years ago. I have a sister who died 2010, so 8 years ago. Her death was very, very different. She was 60. She had made a lot of mistakes in life and only realized near the end of her life how much she regretted some of the things that she had done. She had both diabetes and heart disease, and she had one foot that had been amputated, and she knew that she was nearing the point where she was going to make her transition, and she wasn't dealing with it very well. So there came a day when she was going to be admitted to the hospice. Her husband went to work as normal. Her twin sister, I have had twin sisters, her twin sister was there, and her daughter, to help with the transition, and they sent a ambulance, not actually an ambulance, but a vehicle to transport her. So she got to the hospice, and the receptionist was all flustered. She said, "We don't have a bed for you." And my sister got very upset. She's like, "What do you mean you don't have a bed?" She's, "Well, let me go check. Let me find out." She says, "Well, I guess I'll just die here in the hallway." She was not in a good space. So they did get a room for her, half an hour later. Barely got her situated in there, and she died just like that. But that fit of emotion did nothing to help the process. And I am quite sure that her period in Kamaloka is going to be far longer than that of my mother, because she made none of the preparation. So it's just two examples of the right way to do it and the wrong way to do it.
The point that we need to make, though, for this is the types of emotions that we perpetuate willingly are the types of feelings that we'll have during this period of dissipation in the state of Kamaloka. And it's been estimated, I think I misspoke a moment ago when I said several hundred years on the high end. That's too much. From what we're told from Theosophy, months or years could be as many as 20 to 40 years in this state of semi-dreaminess. And it could be similar to a nightmare state, depending on the type of life that we live.
This is actually a very good way to describe it, because it's very similar to what you experience at night. Either your dreams are pleasant, or they may be full of anxiety or fear or trepidation. They can cover a whole range of emotions, but that's the key: emotions. If your life is, if you're a yogi and your life is just calm like that, you'll have almost no time at all in Kamaloka.
And what is there might be relatively pleasant, for example, and it might be very fast, very, very short.
So yeah, it can be more like a nightmare for some people, and for some people it's just a range of emotions.
Well, I understand that area is where both heaven and hell exist. You were talking earlier about something else that transpired there, but heaven and hell.
Not limbo. What is it?
Purgatory.
Purgatory. Yeah. All three of those are basically.
Well, it's said that this is where the idea of hell comes from, is the unresolved emotions that we perpetuate, that we create, and they have to be dissipated and resolved. So the emotional vehicle, the body that we use to feel emotions, can then be discarded and can then pass away on its own. And this idea is not a punishment. It's just a natural law of cause and effect. It's similar to karma, how karma works. And so it's not a punishment, and it's not intended to scare anyone. It's just a result. So, in religions, we talk about if you're not a good person, you go to hell. Well, that's exactly the same thing. That's what we're saying here, except it's exactly, yes.
A lot of people
It's
live
hell.
in hell.
Correct.
Living.
It's funny that you say that, because on our notes here, we say hell exists on earth, and it continues after death, depending on how we think and feel. So,
But it's your state of mind.
It is.
Isn't purgatory, according to Catholics?
And not being
I've always heard,
baptized
yeah.
before.
No, that you think of you're going to this middle ground,
Oh, that's limbo.
this place where you're thinking about what you did wrong.
I'm not sure. It might be that.
No, isn't that?
No, we were trying, I said, oh, that's limbo, when the baby dies before he's or she is baptized. So that's limbo. Purgatory is, to me, always was the step before heaven. Like where you
It's
go
in between.
to.
Do you want to talk about accidents and suicides now? Is it the time?
Yeah.
Let's talk about what happens in the case of an accidental death and a suicide, and we'll also bring up what happens to children before they reach the age of reason, and someone who might be an adult but never developed mentally to the age of reason. These are all issues that Theosophy brings up. But
Okay, first let's take a look at suicides. There's something that's very important to distinguish here. Some people commit suicide in a state of insanity, whether it's temporary or permanent. And those people don't have the same responsibility that others do who commit suicide in full consciousness. So motive is everything in your karma. Always. Your motive is everything. So those people, and they're probably very few, to tell the truth, who are insane when they commit suicide. They, nevertheless, will still have a rough time. The consequence is still very similar. Here's the problem. Most people commit suicide because they feel like they cannot deal with whatever they're encountering at that period in their life. They just can't put up with it any longer. And so I'm going to take the easy way out and commit suicide. Well, the problems are several. Number one, it's not your natural time when you're supposed to die. So that throws everything off from that point of view. Secondly, is that you're in a tremendous emotional state. So you're going to have a very rough time of it. The idea that I'm just going to go to sleep and not have any existence, it doesn't work, unfortunately. So what happens? They then have some realization, maybe clear and maybe not so clear, that they've messed up, basically. Well, that didn't solve anything. So what happens? They still have all of these desires and emotions and anger and frustration, and no way to live them out, no way to resolve them. So they go through a very, very difficult period of a number of years.
because the physical body is the vehicle needed to work these things out. So it's kind of like you're just experiencing it, and you can't do anything about it.
You can't create karma except with the physical body, and you can't work karma out except with the physical body. So now talk about limbo, or being in a state of unable to do anything. They're much more aware than the normal person who dies, or the person who dies at their natural point of death. So they have more awareness and they have more emotional problems. Not something that you would wish on anybody, really. So there's nothing they can do but deal with it at that point. Here's where you have to be very careful. Those people are very susceptible to mediums and to anyone who has medium capabilities, or, because they're quite often looking for someone that they can kind of a vehicle.
To host them.
Yeah, so because there are a couple of different situations. For example, a person who dies with extreme addiction to alcohol or drugs, they do the same thing. They are desperately looking for someone, a vehicle that they can use to satisfy that urge and to feel the results of that. So people who have very strong addictions are quite, the whole idea of the person who is addicted to alcohol seeing visions, seeing people and seeing things. Well, they do see things, and they're very susceptible. The more common it is for them to be in a stupor or a state of drunkenness, the more common that these entities can take over.
Yeah.
Esther's asking about euthanasia.
Oh, that's just.
Oh, okay. Let's get to that in a moment. So with suicide, the teaching of the Catholic Church that it's analogous to murder is probably not completely inaccurate, because according to Theosophy, you don't have the right to take your own life. So actually, the answer is the one about euthanasia.
If you murder yourself.
Yes, you're murdering yourself. In fact, that's the origin of the word. Suicide means self-murder. Homicide is killing a person. Suicide is self-murder.
So the same for euthanasia.
So, yes, actually.
And of animals?
Well, animals don't have karma, and I would be more willing to perform or to allow euthanasia to be performed on an animal. And I don't have anything against people who decide that they want to practice euthanasia. It's kind of like abortion. I don't want to inflict my ideas on somebody else. They've got enough to deal with. I'm not going to try to make a moral judgment on them.
In Danion's book, Saved by the Light, when he crossed over, because he died for 28 minutes, he was pronounced dead, and he was walking through walls and doing things that he didn't even know what was happening. But there was this place after he saw these beings of light, I think they were 13, I'm not sure, but he did see, he calls it the blue-gray place of people that either committed suicide or that did evil things, and they kept reliving. He said they kept reliving what happened, what to them, like a suicide. He would, and I don't know how he knew that, but in the book he better explains it, but I can see that happening.
So obviously, if a person has already committed suicide, there's nothing you can do about it. But if you are in a position to train people, and if they trust you, you might be able to save a life if you can explain that it doesn't solve anything at all. It doesn't. And in their next lifetime, it may take them a couple of lifetimes just to catch up, to start making progress again.
See, that's the thing.
Exactly.
That's the biggest thing. Suicide.
You don't
want to
escape from anything at all. So even though it seems like an escape, it's not.
Temporary.
Now, here's another thing, accidents. People sometimes, because of their karma that they came into life with, are destined to die a violent death, whether it's by war or by violence at someone else's hand. or by just an actual accident, or by an act of nature. That may be the time when they're supposed to die. It can be a violent death, and it may be natural, even though it
Based on karma.
Based on karma. It may be a car accident or unnatural in that
We can
sense,
call it
but
an accident.
it's the intended result. So those are not true accidents. There are, however, accidents where a person was supposed to live longer, but because of something they did or someone else, their life gets cut short, and then they die precipitously.
How do you decipher that?
We can't.
How do other people?
Well,
I mean,
an
for those
adept
two-
would be able to look back. A yogi could look back if he or she wanted to, and see what the cause was and whether or not that was supposed to occur. We have no way to do that, so we can't judge any of them. All we can do is be aware that it may be a possibility. But the person who does die in a true accident is pretty much in the same position as the suicide person. They're usually not prepared because they haven't had any time to prepare. Now, if they're a very wise individual, they're always prepared.
But they'd be in
Wise
shock
individuals,
because of the accident. They'd be in shock.
yeah, exactly.
Because it just happened and they're calling.
And quite often, it's a younger person who is in, a person who is 19, 20, 25 years old is in their prime emotional
But how can that be
part
their
of life.
fault? How can it be considered
We're talking
the same
about true accidents.
as a suicide? I mean, that they would have to live that out in their next
See
life.
that?
The same as
It's-
suicide when they were just a total unresponsible victim.
You're absolutely right. They are not responsible. That there's not karma,
I mean, in a suicide, you are responsible.
right? Karma, you still have to go through the results of that. So the only thing I can say is that the adepts say that those people are given special attention after they die. Those people who die in true accidents are given extra help, so to speak. And it is made up to them in a future lifetime.
And it's rare,
Because
yeah.
You're right. It's
rare.
not their fault. It just happened.
And we wouldn't know which
No, we
one is
wouldn't.
planned and which one is.
Yeah.
So
accident.
It's rare. A true accident, a mistake. The universe doesn't
Yeah.
make a lot of mistakes.
That's
Oh,
where
that's
I'm
true.
coming
Right.
from.
Yeah.
It's rare. Most violent deaths we're saying are not accidents,
before
karmically speaking.
we invented automobiles and bombs and vehicles of war, etc., there were very, very few occurrences. So in one sense, humanity has inflicted this on ourselves, and there's nothing we can do but deal with the consequences. So in one sense, it's part of our human karma. We all share in human karma.
Let's address this question from Esther. She says, what about being calm with that ending of extreme pain and bodily torture through terminal illness? Are you saying it's a state of mind? I think she's referring to euthanasia still. That was her question before.
Previously, I would have been more when I was younger, I would have been more in favor of euthanasia. But as I learned more in life, I realized that I want to eliminate as much karma as I can in this lifetime. If I am suffering physically, emotionally, or mentally, it's because of something that is out of balance and that I've created myself. So I personally would choose to live to the very last minute of my natural life and to eliminate as much karma as possible. So yes, it's a state of mind, and it has to do with your preparatory period and letting go.
Awesome. All right, it's 4:00.
Uh-oh. We're right back where we started.
Yeah.
No. Well, they're still dead. No, actually, we weren't quite dead when we started.
I have
It's all
so
good.
many questions right now, and I know we're out of time.
I'm gonna
Lucky you.
let's say goodbye to our online folks and turn off our recording. Then we can chat if we'd like. So thank you to our online folks. You guys are always great. Just a couple things that we haven't touched on, but that's okay. We can save them until next.
I guess my